Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to get started here in just a couple minutes. If you have any questions, any issues, you can type them into the chat box and somebody will get back to you shortly. Give us another minute or two and we should get started. There won't be any sound for a little bit though. All right, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Coronavirus Scams, What Advocates Can Do to Help. This webinar is brought to you by the National Center for Victims of Crime in partnership with the FINRA Investor Education Foundation. My name is Laura Cook and I am the Director of Training and Technical Assistance with the National Center for Victims of Crime. Just a few housekeeping items as people continue to trickle in. For anyone that's new to the Zoom platform, there's a chat box that can be used to send messages to the entire group, myself, our IT coordinator, or other panelists directly if you're having any issues. At the bottom of your screen, you'll also see a Q&A box. If you'd like to ask a question to the presenters, please go ahead and type it in there, and I'll ask the questions at the end of the presentation. We will also be sending around an email afterward with a link to the recording, a PDF of the slides, and a short survey. So the National Center for Victims of Crime, for those that don't know, we've been serving victim advocates, victims, and others who provide direct services to victims for over 30 years. We've got a number of programs. I've highlighted just a few of them here. You can find information about these programs as well as many others that we work on our new website, www.victimsofcrime.org. And I say new website because we have updated it recently. It's the same URL, but there's new information on there for everyone. This webinar today was put together through our Financial Crime Resource Center. That Resource Center was started about 8 years ago with an aim to help victims of fraud in their recovery. We do a number of webinars on various topics, and so today we're going to be talking about coronavirus scams. Before we get to the presentation, I'd like to briefly introduce our presenters. First up, we have Christine Kiefer, Senior Director of the FINRA Investor Education Foundation. In this role, she develops tools and programs for law enforcement, victim advocates, and consumers to advance investor protection and fraud prevention initiatives. Christine also directs the FINRA Foundation's research into the prevalence, mechanics, and consequences of financial fraud. We also have Lisa Weintraub-Schifferle, who's an attorney in the Federal Trade Commission's Division of Consumer and Business Education. At the FTC, Lisa regularly leads trainings on scams, identity theft, and cybersecurity. Before arriving at the FTC, Lisa spent 8 years at the Maryland Legal Aid Bureau as a staff attorney and supervising attorney. And we also have Erin Scheithe. She's a content specialist in the Office for Older Americans at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. In this role, Erin develops plain language resources on later life financial security and fraud and scam prevention for older adults, their families, intermediaries, and service providers. And so with that, I'll turn it over to our first presenter, Christine, to tell you a little bit more about FINRA and their Investor Education Foundation.
Thanks, Laura. Just very briefly, for those that aren't familiar, I am with an organization called FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. And FINRA is a non-governmental regulator overseen by the Securities and Exchange Commission. So we work very closely with federal regulators, the SEC, and with the state securities regulators to oversee part of the investment sales business. In fact, FINRA oversees all brokers and brokerage firms in the country. And FINRA is completely dedicated to investor protection and market integrity. And part of our investor protection work really takes the form of education. And that's where the FINRA Investor Education Foundation comes in. The FINRA Foundation is a wholly owned subsidiary of FINRA, and we're dedicated to research and outreach. And through many partnerships, including this partnership with the National Center for Victims of Crime, we help work on issues that focus on building financial capability for Americans. And in this case, on helping Americans understand to spot and avoid fraud and scams. And as we get started, Laura, go ahead. Thank you. As we get started, I want to add a little context to the issue of fraud victimization before we talk about what types of scams we're seeing specifically related to coronavirus. And Lisa and Aaron will get into that. When we think about biases, and we all have biases, it clouds our judgment, particularly when these four elements are at play. And this comes from the literature around biases. And when we know that when information is complex, when there's a great deal of risk and uncertainty, where we have a desire for a positive outcome. So we've sort of got this internal clock that says we really want this specific outcome. And when there's conflicting priorities, for instance, something that might be better in the short term versus the long term. Maybe it's better to save for retirement, but we want to use that funds for a new house right now. When we have a conflicting priorities. So when all four of these elements are present, we find that biases kick into play and they really cloud our judgment. And so when we think about the current environment, it's very, it's complex, and I would say risk and uncertainty is at the top of the list in this situation. We can see where judgment may be impaired, and that may present greater vulnerability to scams at this time. Laura? And I wanted to introduce you to a study that the FINRA Foundation engaged in. We released in September of 2019 with the Better Business Bureau's Institute for Marketplace Trust and the Stanford Center on Longevity, and actually the Federal Trade Commission provided staff assistance to this data analysis. And what we did was we looked at people that had actually reported a scam to BBB's Scam Tracker database, which is a new way that people can report national scams. And we wanted to see if there were differences between the people that reported a scam and didn't actually engage with that scam, and those who reported it and engaged but were victimized, and some that were not victimized. Usually when we think about these national studies, we don't necessarily know who received the offer. We just know that people didn't fall for it or did fall for it. And in this case, we say all of these people reported a scam, so they were actually approached by it. So what was different between those that fell and those that fell victim and those that didn't? And so as you can see on the screen on the right side there, about half of the sample, 47% of the people that actually reported these scams to BBB Scam Tracker said that they didn't actually follow up with it. They were reporting it, providing more of a tip and a report, but they didn't actually engage with that, with the scammer. However, we saw that about 30% of the people that reported said that they did have some engagement. Maybe they clicked on a link, or they answered the phone and had a conversation, but they didn't actually ultimately lose any money to the offer. And then about 23% did engage and were subsequently victimized in that scam. And I'm going to touch on sort of 3 key findings from the study, and they relate to our current situation. Among those who did engage, they actually responded in some fashion. We found that those that did not have anyone available to discuss an offer with, so discuss that pitch, were more likely to lose money. That's a social isolation issue. But we also find that those who chose not to discuss the solicitation, so maybe they weren't socially isolated, but they chose to withhold that information from others or not share it with others or get a second opinion, they were also more likely to engage and ultimately lose money. And so we find that social isolation is an increased risk factor for vulnerability to scams, but we also find that physical isolation and social isolation can work in combination. So you don't always have to be physically isolated to be socially isolated. And so it's very important to understand that some people mentally may feel isolated. And I was listening to a podcast recently, and they were talking about levels of isolation, and it's certainly, there's community isolation, there's close connections with family and others as a form of isolation, and then there's, of course, there's physical isolation. Laura? And another finding from the study is the role of structural interventions, and we do find that there was an appreciable difference for people that said that someone tried to step in and convince them not to participate in, sort of to follow through on the scammer's instructions. So of the full sample of people that reported to Scam Tracker, about 53% engaged in some form. About 20% of those people, of those 53%, said someone tried to intervene and get me not to follow through. And of that group, 51% of them were ultimately, they stopped. They were not victimized and they didn't lose money. And while we would love to say that 100% of the people that received an intervention didn't end up losing any money and being victimized, it is really encouraging. And I remind you as advocates that your role in intervening in these situations can have a really strong effect for people. So we encourage you to keep doing that. Laura? And the last key finding, and then I'll be tossing it over to Lisa in a second, is that knowledge really did make a difference. Having some knowledge about the method of scammers not only kept happy, 49% of the people said that was a reason for them not to engage at all. But even for those that engaged, having pre-knowledge of the methods of scammers was an important factor for ultimately not being victimized. And then also taking the time to research the scam offer. So just going through the process of having an intervention, or even knowing that I should do a little bit of additional research, can make a huge difference as to whether people are ultimately, even if they engage with the offer, ultimately not victimized. And so if you're interested in learning more about that study and others, I put up here the FINRA.org website, where FINRA has a lot of tools for investors and for you as advocates. But I did not remember to put the FINRA Foundation's website, where we have that research. So it's just FINRA, F-I-N-R-A, foundation.org. And there we have a research webpage that will lead you to that study that I just talked about. And Laura, go ahead. And I'll turn it over to Lisa Schifferle.
Thanks so much, and thanks to FINRA and NTVC for hosting this webinar. My name is Lisa Schifferle. I'm with the Federal Trade Commission, which is a national consumer protection agency, if any of you are not familiar with the FTC. And that was a really great overview why it's really important that we're all here gathering to talk about coronavirus scams, because our research really shows that when people recognize scams, they're able to avoid them, and as advocates, you can help them recognize and avoid these scams. So today I'm going to talk about some of the scams related to coronavirus, what we're seeing at the FTC, as well as what the FTC is doing about those scams. So on the next slide, you'll see that scammers are always following the headlines, whether it's in health emergencies or natural disasters. That's what they do, and so they're doing it now with coronavirus, and their scams are reflecting those coronavirus headlines too. So we're going to share information about some of those scams to help you help other people spot scams, and also to help people report scams. You'll see on this slide, it says report scams to ftc.gov/complaint. And we really do encourage you to tell people to report these scams. Even if they do not give money to them, it's still helpful. The reports really make a difference. They help us at the FTC and other law enforcement partners target our law enforcement efforts and also our consumer education messages. So let's talk about some of the scams we're seeing. On this slide, you'll see one category of scams that we see a lot of are the treatment and cure scams. This is everything from miracle cures, vaccine offers, and home test kits to scams that target people on Medicare. And the big tip to pass on is for people to ignore online and telephone offers for vaccinations, tests, or cures. And please remind people that if they see ads with prevention, treatment, or cure claims for coronavirus, those are scams. Right now, we know scammers are hawking bogus products to try saying they can prevent, treat, or cure the coronavirus. But right now we also know that there is no available cure or vaccine for coronavirus. So any of those claims are not scientifically substantiated. Also, if you have clients who are on Medicare, please let them know about Medicare-related scams. They may get calls, emails, or see ads that claim to give Medicare recipients special access. Sometimes it's to testing or to treatments. And they tell you that if you give your Medicare number or if you pay money, you'll get on a special list for first access to testing kits or vaccines. But that's not how Medicare works. Medicare's not doing that. They're not going to call anyone to offer any kind of special access like that. So please, if you hear anyone who's gotten that call, let them know that it is a scam.
Hey, Lisa, this is Christine. I hate to interrupt, but we've got some chat going on that you're coming in a little soft. If you have any way to speak a little louder, there's quite a number of people that are saying this.
I'm on the phone rather than through my computer. So can people hear me now?
I think just talk louder than you think you need to, and we'll do our best.
Okay, is it any better when I put it on speakerphone? Can people hear me now? Yes.
People said better now. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
It'd be worse on speaker, but I'll go ahead like this then. That is good to know. I'm glad people got that early on. So I was talking about treatment and cure-related scams, but now we'll move on the next slide to email, text scams, and malicious websites. And you may know that scammers often send emails and texts that try to get your personal information, your money, or download malware onto your computer. This slide shows an example of a fake World Health Organization email that would put malware on your computer if you clicked on the link. So if you see an email like this, make sure not to click on it and pass on that tip that you should not click on links from sources you don't know, or even from sources that look legitimate. You may know the World Health Organization. Just don't click on links in unsolicited emails because it could download a virus onto your computer or device. Now, we've also seen that scammers have bought up a lot of domains that include coronavirus, the word coronavirus, and even include misspellings of the word. But if you visit one of those sites, they'll put malware on your device. So be careful and only stick with known trusted sites like the CDC or like ftc.gov/coronavirus or irs.gov/coronavirus. Also, it's important to make sure that your anti-malware and antivirus software on your computer is up to date. Now on the next slide, I want to talk to you about robocalls. And now that many of us are working from home, we may be home to get a lot more of these calls than we usually do. So scammers have been quick to get into the coronavirus business of robocalls, offering things like those fake cures that we talked about, fake test kits, fake access for Medicare recipients, even health insurance, cleaning supplies. And now that people are having financial difficulties, we're also seeing scams related to mortgage relief and student loan debt relief, as well as Social Security Administration and other government-related scams. And the big one right now, which we're going to talk about in more detail in a minute, is the economic stimulus payment-related scams. So the big message to tell people is to hang up on illegal robocallers, then block that number and report it to the FTC at ftc.gov/complaint. Also, please remind people, don't press any numbers. It's also a good reminder to all of us as advocates. Sometimes we think, oh, we know it's a scam, it'll be fun to play along. But if you do, the recording might say that pressing a number will let you speak to a live operator, but really it can put you on a list so that they call you more frequently, and it might lead to more robocalls instead. So the best thing to do is to just hang up if you get a call like this. Now let's talk about the government stimulus checks. Another category of scams that we're seeing relate to the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, Economic Stimulus Act, or Economic Security Act, or the CARES Act. And it provides financial help to individuals. A lot of you may have heard about the checks that people are getting, the economic stimulus checks. And the big thing to know in terms of scams is if someone's calling or emailing out of the blue to claim there's money available from a government agency, but they're saying you have to make an upfront payment or provide some personal information, please tell people to hang up the phone, because the government is not asking you to pay to get help or asking for that sensitive information over the phone. I'll go into more detail in a minute about how the government economic stimulus payments do work. But first I want to tell you a little bit more about some of the other scams that we're seeing. On this slide you'll see the fake charity scams. So charity scammers follow the headlines too. And whenever there's a natural disaster, whether it's a hurricane or something else or a health crisis like this, we also see fake charities pop up as well as fake appeals for money. They may come on social media, on crowdfunding sites, in phone calls or emails. And as advocates, please remind clients to do your homework when it comes to donations. Use the organizations listed at ftc.gov/charity to help you research charities. The BBB has a Wise Giving Alliance, and there are other resources at ftc.gov/charity to help you check if a charity is legit or not. And another good tip to pass on is that if anyone asks for a supposed charitable donation in cash by gift card or by wiring money, that's a huge red flag. So tell them not to do it, because those are signs of a scam. As you probably know, scammers like to use the gift cards or money wiring, because then it's very hard to get your money back. So then on the next slide, let's talk about the stimulus checks, because there's a lot of questions about the stimulus checks, how much they're going to be, how you're going to get them, and all of that. And even before the ink was dry on the CARES Act, scammers were targeting people with fake relief check schemes. So the first step in helping people spot and avoid these type of scams is to cut through that confusion and let them know how these payments work. Now things are changing rapidly week to week and even daily, so it's really important to look for updates from trusted sources like irs.gov/coronavirus is the main site to get information about these payments. But let me tell you a little bit about what we know right now as of today. And that is, on the next slide, you'll see who is eligible for full payments. Taxpayers who filed a 2018 or 2019 tax return are eligible for full payments if they have incomes below certain thresholds. That's $75,000 for individuals and $150,000 for married couples. Now, when the CARES Act first passed, there's a lot of confusion about eligibility for individuals who do not file taxes or who otherwise have no taxable income, including Social Security recipients and SSI beneficiaries. But Treasury has clarified that now, so we know Social Security and SSI recipients are eligible for payments like everyone else. Those payments will be sent to the bank account on file with Social Security, and people with no taxable income are also eligible too. Now, how much will the payments be? Eligible adults will receive up to $1,200 or $2,400 per couple, and some will get less depending on their income, and above the eligible income thresholds, the payment will decrease until it stops altogether. So basically the way it works is the payment is reduced by $5 for every $100 above the eligibility threshold. So for example, a taxpayer who's a single taxpayer who makes $85,000 would receive a partial payment of $700, and a taxpayer earning $99,000 would receive no payment. Another important thing to know is about dependents, and this is something that is confusing a lot of people, understandably. To be eligible for economic impact payment for children, there is an additional $500 payment per dependent child. To be eligible for that, parents or guardians have to have claimed the child as a dependent. If they claimed it on the taxes, then they will get that payment in their initial payment. But it's also good to know that young adults, like college students, can't get the payment on their own if someone else claims them as a dependent. Some other important things to know is about how this $500 extra payment will affect SSA Social Security recipients and some of the people who need that extra money the most. The way it's set up right now, if you're a Social Security recipient or get the railroad retirement benefits, the deadline was last week to add your dependent information online at irs.gov/coronavirus. So if people did add that information online, they will get the $500 dependent payment along with their main payment right away. Otherwise, they'll get their main payment right away, and they won't get that additional $500 until they file their 2020 taxes. Now, I know this is a lot of detail, but I know especially for people who work with low-income people, like I did at Legal Aid, people are often very anxious to get their hands on this money and really desperately need it. So that's why I'm telling you these details. Another important detail to know is if you're working with someone who gets SSI or VA benefits and they have dependent children and they did not file tax returns, they have until May 5th to go online to irs.gov/coronavirus to make sure that IRS has the information they need to get that $500 right away. Otherwise, again, they'll get the main payment now, but the $500 won't come until they file their taxes for 2020 with their 2020 payment. So how will you get your payment? If you filed your taxes, if you get Social Security payments, you don't have to do anything. You'll get it based on what's on file, and that covers the vast majority of people. If you want to get direct deposit instead of a check, you'll need to update that information on file with the IRS. And again, you can go to irs.gov/coronavirus to check the status of your payments and change to direct deposit if you don't have it already. Now on the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about, I already talked about how non-filers can get their payment, but if people haven't filed at all, they do need to go to the IRS's online portal at irs.gov/coronavirus, and they will need to provide certain personal information that's listed on this slide, like their name, address, date of birth, Social Security number, bank account number, an IP PIN if they were a victim of tax ID theft, and then an ID. So I know people are often understandably leery to give such personal information, but the IRS is requiring that information in order to get these payments for people who have not filed taxes, and that would include people who maybe have income under $12,200 or have no income or who are otherwise not required to file taxes. But just one reminder is that since you do have to give all this personal information, make absolutely sure if you're dealing with a client who's doing this that they go to irs.gov/coronavirus and they never enter that information through a hyperlink in a text or an email. They should type in that URL themselves before putting all of this sensitive information into a portal. So when will you get your payment? That's a big question a lot of people have. Direct deposits have already begun, so many people have already received their payment. Mailing of paper checks should begin in May, and payments will be sent throughout the year until the end of 2020. A spokeswoman for the Treasury Department said that approximately 50 million to 70 million people should have already received their payments through direct deposit as of April 15th. And those with lower incomes are supposed to be prioritized to get their payments sooner than those with higher incomes. So let's talk a little bit about the scams that we're seeing and how to avoid scams related to these economic stimulus checks. It's really important to know that if someone calls or emails out of the blue claiming there's money available from a government agency, but you have to make an upfront payment or provide personal information, hang up the phone. The IRS is not calling people about the economic impact payment. If you need to provide that personal information, you should go to irs.gov/coronavirus. And the government is not going to ask anyone to pay upfront to get help or ask over the phone for this type of sensitive personal information. So please make sure that people know to hang up on any calls like that. Another thing I want to mention is we're on the lookout for money mule scams, which is where people try to make you basically launder money for them. And what could happen is that you could receive a check for more than what you're expecting, and then they say deposit some and then give back the overpayment by sending cash or gift cards like iTunes or Google Play, or by wiring money. Those are scams too. So make sure that it's the official check from the IRS and the U.S. government before depositing the check, because scammers may try to use this as an opportunity for money mule scams as well. And again, please remind people that irs.gov/coronavirus is the only way they should be submitting information to the IRS, never in response to a call, text, or email. So you may be wondering what the FTC and the federal government is doing about all of these scams that we're seeing. There are a couple things going on right now. Even before we started seeing a lot of these scams, the FTC, along with the FDA, sent warning letters to makers of teas, essential oils, and colloidal silver who claimed their products would help prevent or cure coronavirus, but there was no scientific evidence to back up those claims. So there's a list of those companies there. And these warning letters have actually been quite effective. We give them 48 hours to say how they'll address the concerns or to stop making the claims. And they've been very effective at stopping these scams. The FTC and the FCC also sent out warning letters to VoIP providers about robocalls related to coronavirus scams, and we've seen a decline in the number of robocalls related to coronavirus scams since we sent out those letters. So those are some of the things going on. We also just announced a law enforcement action recently against a company involved with coronavirus scams, so stay tuned for more of those as well. And how can you stay informed and find out more about these scams after this webinar and in the future? Please sign up for the FTC's consumer alerts. It's free, and you can do it at ftc.gov/subscribe. You can also share any of these alerts if your organization has an online e-newsletter, or share them in your community if your community has any sort of neighborhood newsletter. They are all free and in the public domain, so you can just copy them verbatim and spread the word about these scams to help stop them. Also, as a reminder to please report scams to FTC at ftc.gov/complaint, and to find out the latest about coronavirus, you can go to ftc.gov/coronavirus. That has all of our blogs and all of our other information related to coronavirus. So we hope you will check out more and spread the word about what you learned in this webinar to help other people recognize and avoid coronavirus scams. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Aaron Shifey at the CFPB to talk about some of the things the CFPB is doing.
Hey, Aaron, if you're talking, we can't hear you. You might need to unmute yourself. It looks like we might have
Looks like
lost.
she's dropped from the
Yeah.
panelist, so maybe we should do questions until she comes back in.
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely do that. Megan, if you could send her a quick email to see if she needs help calling back in, that would be great. And then I'll go over the questions because we did have a number come in during Lisa's portion.
Okay, will do.
Thank you. Okay, so Q&A. One of the first ones, let's see. There was one that came in earlier about having a robo-killer app. Does that help with robocalls?
Hi, it's Erin. I'm back.
Hey, Erin. All right, so we'll take a pause on questions and we will let you go ahead into your presentation, and we'll come back to those questions at the end.
Okay, thank you so much, and I apologize for that. I have no idea what happened. So the CFPB is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We are a fairly new federal agency. We were created after the last recession for the purpose of really educating consumers on complex financial products, not investments, but on products like checking accounts, mortgages, car loans, debt collectors, et cetera. And what I was saying before I was so rudely cut off by my own phone was that I think we've put this webinar together fairly well, if we do say so ourselves, in that we had some context for why we're doing it. Lisa gave us a ton of information, the what's happening right now, and how. And I think that I can provide maybe a little bit of information on how you can help. So let's go to the next slide. We have created, much like other federal agencies and nonprofits, a central hub on our consumerfinance.gov website for coronavirus. So if you go to consumerfinance.gov/coronavirus, we have resources in English and Spanish, as well as Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, and Tagalog. What I've added here, and what I think is really cool that we're doing, is that we've added printer-friendly PDFs that you can download and print off of the Asian languages that I mentioned. But we also have MP3 audio files where someone who's a native speaker is reading that information to you. And I think that's pretty cool, and please feel free to share this with the clients you serve. And definitely check back for updates. I know that I'm speaking for a lot of us on this call, both presenters and attendees, that this is definitely one of the most productive periods of work we've had. And we are just churning out information on the various different aspects of personal finance that go along with a major health and economic situation like we're having now. So if we go to the next slide, some of the content topics and themes that we have on our coronavirus page include submitting a complaint with any products or services or companies, which I'll talk a little bit more about, how to protect your credit, tips for financial caregivers, dealing with debt, student loans, mortgage relief, and we also have information about the economic stimulus checks. We have a ton of information about scams, and so that's what I'll talk about next. If we go to the next slide, we really have 3 articles on our site that are specifically around coronavirus-related scams. And those are focused on, a couple of them have a specific focus on older adults, but they're really applicable to anyone. We even are working with the FTC on a couple of these pieces, just because we know that our work is always better when we are together and on the same page about things. So definitely check out these resources. When you can find them on our coronavirus landing page, but also when you get the slides after the presentation, you should be able to just click right on those. And so if you go to the next slide, we have some scam prevention resources at the CFPB, and this is what I just want to mention to you in terms of how you can help. So even before the coronavirus, even before these particular type of scams, we have for a long time been focused on scam and fraud prevention. One resource that I would call your attention to is the Money Smart for Older Adults program. Even if you're not working with older adults, this is a terrific program that you can pull from. We worked on it with the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, which is another federal bank regulator. It's who insures your money at the bank, so you've probably seen those initials before. And we have a print resource that is really a glossary of every different type of scam that you can think of. And you are welcome to pull from it. I think one of the best things about getting resources from the federal government is that you can actively take and borrow from everything that we have. Nothing is copyrighted, so feel free to republish any of our blogs. We'd love it if you give us a mention, but quite honestly, you can take sections from each and craft something on your own. We also have some fraud prevention resources that are in the form of a placemat. So this is something that came about through Meals on Wheels America several years ago. They are simple, eye-catching, large print scam prevention resources. We have done a couple again, in concert with other federal agencies. And we're actually working on creating these in additional formats other than just placemats. So you'd be able to print these from your website or from our website and send them out. You can also attach them to email newsletters and things like that. So I'd encourage you to check those out on our consumerfinance.gov site. Our Managing Someone Else's Money guides really help financial caregivers. These are great for people who are handling the money or property for a friend or family member who's incapacitated. So this could include some of the population you serve, older adults, as well as adults with disabilities, whether those disabilities are long-term or temporary. Just good tips on preventing fraud and scams and protecting assets, as well as a little bit of help on how to manage someone else's money the right way. And last on this slide, we have our Protecting Residents from Financial Exploitation guide. This is really originally written for assisted living and nursing facility staff, but again, I think there's a lot of really good information for service providers to help you prevent and spot warning signs of financial abuse. So definitely check that one out as well. On the next slide, I'll tell you about a couple of things that we have that are not scam related, but are, I think, helpful for this period. Again, more tips for financial caregivers. That's a huge push for my office specifically, but also online and mobile banking tips. If you have any clients who are new to online or mobile banking, most financial institutions have a fairly simple process laid out on their websites, but this can even be a precursor to that. And kind of last, but certainly not least, would be planning your finances for an uncertain future. This blog we just published at the end of last week, and gives you some tips to talk with your spouse or other family members about putting plans in place if you become unable to manage your own finances. I think this is helpful for all married couples, partnered couples, as well as anyone who's on their own and, you know, could be in a hospital for weeks at a time. So unfortunately, this is the reality of the situation that we have to issue guidance like this. So that's one to check out too. On our next slide, we have some other helpful resources. If you do serve older clients and they have a reverse mortgage, we do have a disaster guide that can help those folks figure out exactly what they're responsible for, and then again, other resources that I've mentioned. Let's go to the next slide. This is a great one on our complaint process. One of, I think, the most unique things about our agency, I think a lot of different agencies accept complaints. If you learn about a scam, definitely report that to the Federal Trade Commission, and Lisa gave us some really great ways to do that. If you have a client or yourself, if you have an issue with a financial service provider, submit that complaint to the CFPB. We help connect consumers with financial companies to get direct responses about their problems, usually a lot faster than you can do it on your own. So our website for complaints is consumerfinance.gov/complaint. There is even an option if you are filling out the complaint form online. There's an option to check if you're doing this alongside someone, meaning you are helping someone to submit a complaint if they're not maybe comfortable with doing it online, or if you're helping them to make sure they get all the facts straight. So if you have any clients who would love to submit a complaint, either they had to wait hours and hours before they could get any information on mortgage forbearance, or if they are getting a lot of calls from debt collectors, those are two of our biggest complaint areas right now. You can help them submit those complaints. So I would encourage you to check that out. Usually during presentations like this, when I mention this slide, even if you're a service provider, you might have had a complaint with a financial institution that you might want to share with us. So definitely do that, and there is an opportunity to tag those with the coronavirus. Let's go to the next slide. This is my last one. I've just, if you do need kind of quick tips or links to different resources, our social media has been doing a pretty good job of that lately. We've got a couple of videos that explain the economic impact stimulus payments in a really clear and fairly concise manner. We have a video that's been viewed a record number of times. It set records for us within hours of its debut on mortgage forbearance, what that means, how you can get it. And so definitely check out our Facebook, our Twitter, and our YouTube for scam tips, as well as other just general financial management information. And that's where I'll stop, and I know we've got a little bit of time for questions. So Laura, I'll send it back over to you.
Awesome, thank you, Erin, and thanks to all of you for joining us and sharing this information today. So I will jump back to our questions. The first one was about robokiller apps. So are those helpful in actually blocking robocalls?
Sure, this is Lisa at the FTC. I'll take that question. Yes, they can be helpful. The FTC does now recommend getting call blocking apps or call blocking devices for your landline, the apps for your mobile devices, in order to block some of those calls. You can get more information about that at ftc.gov/calls. But we do encourage people to both sign up for the Do Not Call registry and also consider those call blocking apps or devices.
Thanks, Lisa. A couple questions about copies of slides and the recording. That will be going out after the webinar, and along with a survey that we'd love for y'all to fill out if you wouldn't mind. So if you have questions about information on the slides, you will be getting that either later today or tomorrow. So Lisa, we had a couple specific questions about the CARES Act. Somebody had asked if they're married and filed jointly with their husband and have a 21 and 19-year-old. Husband and the person who answered or asked the question are not eligible for stimulus payments, but do claim those two children as dependents. The $500 extra, is that only for dependents under 16?
Right, that's correct. Yeah, I see why it is a bit confusing. But yes, the $500 extra is only for dependents under 16. So this person and their husband would not be eligible for that extra $500. In terms of young adults, dependents, well, in terms of young adults getting a stimulus payment themselves, those young adults are not eligible if they're claimed as a dependent. So this person's 17 and 19-year-old would not be eligible for their own stimulus payment. If the 17 and 19-year-old were not claimed as dependents on the tax return, then they could get their own payment, but the parents wouldn't get the $500. The $500 is, as the person said, only for children 16 or under.
Okay. Next question is, can an adult who receives SSI but is counted as a dependent on someone else's taxes still get stimulus money?
No, if you're counted as a dependent on someone else's taxes, then that person gets the stimulus money.
And if an individual has been paying child support for 5 or more years, but does have some child support in arrears from prior to that time, is there a way that they can make sure they do receive a stimulus check?
That's a good question. I am not a tax lawyer, so I would suggest they check with the IRS at irs.gov/coronavirus or with an accountant. I mean, I haven't seen anything that says that child support arrears would prevent someone from getting the economic stimulus payment, but I don't know. I think they should check with a accountant or tax lawyer, or try to file on irs.gov/coronavirus and see if the IRS says they're eligible or not.
Yeah, I would agree. This is Erin. The only thing we've heard is that student loan payments would not be garnished from the stimulus check, so definitely a good idea to double check with the IRS about child support.
All right, there's a lot of these types of questions coming in. I don't mind asking them, but I have a feeling that you guys might not know a lot of these specifics. So I'm going to jump to the more general questions about some of the other materials first. Follow up to the robocall question. Would you recommend setting call settings to go straight to voicemail for unknown numbers? I know a lot of phones do offer that that option now, that your unknown numbers go right to voicemail.
Yes, I think that's a great technique to use to screen calls and to let all calls go to voicemail first before you pick up.
Okay. Let's see. So prior to coronavirus, the person who asked the question, their organization had scanned presentations multiple times a week that they provided to older adults. Since they can't have these in-person presentations anymore, are there other ways you recommend reaching out to older adults?
Yeah, this is Erin. I think there are a couple of ways that you can do it. We actually give some information about this on our website as well in kind of a different format. So if you go to our tips for financial caregivers, we suggest, and I was on a webinar last week with a senior service provider in Florida. They are using phone calls and video chats. Of course, an older adult would have to have a smartphone or a tablet or some kind of device for this to be possible, but it might make sense to, if you are going out and about into the city, of course, or into the community with protective coverings, if you leave flyers around saying that you'd be happy to check in on people by phone or by a video chat, that can be a really good way to find out how people are doing. Of course, social isolation is an issue for our seniors no matter what. So during this time, it can be quite a bit worse. If there are email lists or if there are other ways that you can get material to them, as I mentioned, our placemats are a really colorful, bright way. Some of them are word games too, so that can kind of cross two things off the list, something to do as well as scam prevention. So check those out. And it may be tough to lead some kind of scam education on a video chat, but again, I think that you will find that seniors are getting a little bit used to these platforms. Just, anecdotally, one of my coworkers, mother's is in her mid-80s and is now Zooming away. My mom took a Zoom call with her Thursday morning coffee group from her car outside of Target the other day. So I think we're all adapting in a lot of ways, but I think sending information out in any way that you can is a good thing to just keep those lines of communication open. So if you have a facility where you can drop things off and print them out, that's great. And then again, those video chats.
Great, thanks, Erin. Somebody did respond in the chat about blocking unknown numbers. The one thing is that you may get calls from people that are important that you'll miss. Like she made the point that victim advocates are teleworking and may only be able to call clients at this point. So I mean, I think there are pluses and minuses, and something that everybody has to individually consider. Typically, if something's important, people will leave a message and you can get back to them. But it's probably, if you do have that on, you want to be monitoring your phone regularly enough that you can get back to those messages and you're not going to miss something important if you do have that block on unknown numbers.
Right, and another thing, rather than blocking the unknown numbers, you could just let all calls go to voicemail. But of course, that's, also has problems, I'm sure, for victim advocates who may need to pick up right away because someone might be in a crisis situation. But that is another option for people, outside of the victim advocate arena, is to just screen all your calls before picking up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I think, if there's a person that's getting inundated with these calls, that might be a good option. So their phone's not constantly ringing and they're constantly having to screen or deal with that, annoyance of getting these calls from robocalls all the time. But, if it's like, I used that the other day and I actually turned it back off because I did miss calls from physicians and things that I wanted to be able to answer right away. So I had it on, turned it back off. I think it really does depend on the situation. Let me see. Somebody asked if they would get a certificate. I will put a certificate. I will put together a certificate that can be emailed out to everybody. You asked if there's any a one-page document with all of these resources. I don't know of one, but maybe that's something that we could put together. I think it's something that I personally might be able to put together quickly. So as far as I know, not right now, but maybe in the future, that's something we could put together. We do have, there's lots of resources out there that compile other resources. Something that I probably should have highlighted earlier was the National Center and FINRA Investor Education Foundation put together a guide for assisting victims of financial fraud called Taking Action. That's available online for free in PDF form, and it includes a ton of resources for all different types of financial crimes. So obviously not specific to coronavirus, but it does cover a lot of mass marketing scams and has resources from the FTC, from the CFPB, and many other agencies as well. And again, it's called Taking Action, an Advocate's Guide to Assisting Financial Fraud. You can find it on our website, victimsofcrime.org, and also on FINRA's saveandinvest.org website.
This is Lisa. I see a question about a national scam reporting portal and questions about confusion about whether to file a complaint with the FTC or the FBI's IC3. I did want to mention to people that the FTC operates Consumer Sentinel, which is a national scam reporting portal, and we actually get reports from IC3 and we get the reports from BBB Scam Tracker in addition to the reports that people file directly through ftc.gov/complaint. So all of that information is put together into Consumer Sentinel, and advocates can get access to it at ftc.gov/explore data, and law enforcement can get access to it to find out details about cases they may want to bring to stop these scams.
Alrighty. Somebody asked if they can share the FTC informational flyer and CFPB information. I'm assuming that that would be welcome for you all to share these resources with others.
Yes, please.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's see. I think that's most that are not the tax related ones. I don't know, because it's 1 o'clock, I don't want to get too much into those specific tax questions. So like our presenter said, if you have questions about that specifically, the IRS website and the IRS website may be the best place to go. I thank you all so much for joining us. We will be sending out a follow-up email. And somebody actually did ask, are we doing additional trainings? The National Center does a lot of trainings like this, a lot of webinars. We'll definitely be doing trainings on different types of financial fraud this year. So keep an eye out on our listserv. And if you are not on that listserv yet, please visit our website and join us. So thank you all again. Have a great day and stay safe out there.